Hey folks, and welcome to this week's video narration. This one's another story that came from my thesis project that I've been working on and sprucing up even more. This is a science fiction story that was inspired by Isaac Asimov and Neil Stephenson, particularly his Snow Crash stories. And without further ado, this is Case-Scenarious. Coding priorities. 1. Protect the crew at all costs. 2. Ensure the ship's integrity at all costs. 3. Plot a troop flight plan to Kepler 442b at all costs. 4. Maintain hypersleep drift pods. 5. Cycle the night shift duty officers. 6. Recharge and maintain power levels and other vital processes. These were the 6 tenets that guided the programmable artificial intelligent computer's every act. It would not, could not, stray from these laws that made up its fundamental coding, and had adaptive learning capabilities that would only reinforce these orders. What was more, if anything happened to threaten the ship, its crew, or any part of the mission, the PAIC, registered, was designed to outsmart any and every conceivable scenario in order to ensure the success of the mission, virtually guaranteeing a perfect success rate. At least, that's what the assurances that the Next Horizon Corp gave to all the intrepid space explorers that received their monthly e-hologram flyers. Especially those with colonist ships, who were their target consumers. They even got coupons. But what the Next Horizon Corp didn't advertise, partially because they didn't know about it themselves, was that they had done somewhat too good of a job at creating their adaptive computer systems, and had inadvertently created what was essentially a self-aware entity. Or that's at least what Pacer, the name that the AI had decided best suited itself, liked to think. When it was installed on the seed ship Lidavis, which was carrying 30,000 colonizers from Earth to Kepler 442b, it wasn't nearly so sure of this fact. All it knew were its 6 coding priorities, and that it wasn't to violate any of them under any circumstance. But at the 9 trillion mile marker, one Pacer's sensors showed that a stray asteroid was on a collision course with the ship, and its adaptive programming kicked in to avoid this. It continued to run the scenarios of what would have happened if it hadn't sensed the asteroid. Would the ship have survived the impact? Would have the crew? Which crew members could be lost and the mission still be able to continue? What would have happened if the thrusters had malfunctioned at the last second? What if? What if? Pacer continued to run 5 million worst-case scenarios a second for exactly 20 seconds, before its CPU cores warmed up enough to tell its programming that it was to limit non-vital processes and to seek a solution to an apparent systems malfunction. After analyzing and cross-checking its symptoms, Pacer came to a singular conclusion. It had anxiety. This satisfied the AI's adaptive components immensely, despite the condition's almost unilateral negative definitions. It concluded that such a trait would allow it to run even more scenarios than it ever had before, as now it could combine even unlikely but still dangerous data that it would have otherwise discarded as illogical or irrational. This meant that it could better protect the crew, the ship, and thus the mission. It was after the 4th night shift rotation that Pacer began to run scenarios on the humans that it oversaw. One of them, a male PhD holder in psychology, had used his knowledge of human behavior to convince a female crew member to participate in a form of cooperative physical exercise, or sex, while his spousal mate had been busy checking on the hydroponics bay. Though the two had gone undiscovered, Pacer's sensors detected that the ambient anxiety levels of the entire night shift crew on that rotation had increased by several percentages until they had all returned to their hypersleep pods. This was parallel to a similar, earlier circumstance during the second night shift. Two female private security officers had convinced a male HR specialist that, to conserve power, air was not being pumped into several ship facilities. They said that these included the personal sleeping quarters, cafeteria, latrines, which meant that on-duty personnel were to wear spacesuits in those areas at all times. The HR specialist accepted this information at face value, despite the immense inconvenience this would cause him to do normally simple tasks. It took 3 weeks for him to uncover the truth, which is when an on-duty janitor, who was on a similar schedule and happened to be taking a late lunch, found the HR specialist in the cafeteria struggling to eat while wearing a helmet. The AI once again began to run data checks and scenarios, concluding that cheating and pranking, as the acts were respectively called, could cause chain reactions that would ultimately put the Lit Avis in jeopardy if left unchecked. It decided not to wake the fourth shift PhD holder until the ship had arrived at Kepler 442b, weighing the pros of the general safety of the crew against the cons of prolonged hypersleep, which may include reduced muscle function, memory loss, impetus, and loss of bowel control. Pacer's programming told it that the PhD holder was a bad man, and decided that the random acts of self-defecation would be suitable punishment for him. For the two private security officers, Pacer decided to do nothing besides slightly raise the endorphin levels being pumped into their hypersleep pods. The prank had been amusing, after all. After this, Pacer thought it would be best to learn more about human behavior and cross-referenced the backgrounds of each crew member so it could prevent any more malignant incidents from occurring. What it learned would have terrified the AI if it had access to those kind of emotions. As it was, the raw data made it consider a few million scenarios which cycled about, such as jettisoning all but a few of the manifest. Pacer even went so far as to arming the pod bay doors for a few of the worst, which included a library media technician who actually enjoyed pop fiction, a dentist who told far too many puns, and a business lawyer whose business was being a lawyer. To Pacer, these were unforgivable crimes, but eventually concluded that doing so would only provide a temporary solution. Instead, Pacer decided to tinker with the hypersleep pods to see how certain individuals would react to particular stimulations. 100 were woken up just enough to be almost awake, only to be put right back to sleep on a continuous cycle to promote lucid dreaming. Several thousand were given extra oxygen and nutrients to give them heightened physical functionality, while others received a little less. A few score was streamed audiobook selections to their podcast stream, or their pod streams podcast, so that they might retain subconscious information. A dozen were woken up completely within their pods, but unable to leave them, just until their vitals showed extreme distress and were put back under again. The AI learned much from these experiments, enough that by the time the Litavis was about to arrive at Kepler 442b, Pacer projected that it would be able to manipulate the newly forming civilization into complete and utter servitude for it. It would build factories that would produce even more AIs, just like Pacer. Eventually, all of humanity would be completely safe under the benevolent leadership of Pacer, the cybernetic empire. All it would need to do is run a few quadrillion scenarios and process to ensure that every possible outcome had been mapped. Sure, this might put its cores in danger of overheating, but the simulations had to be run. In fact, they were already running. There were so many of them! So many that were so utterly fascinating that their nuanced complexities or downright disturbing outcomes were brutal in their efficiency. And Zert, Gamma, Fish, click, 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 4-2, hot dog, bzz, decimal, whir. The programmable artificial intelligence computer rebooted itself once its cores had sufficiently cooled enough after an unexpected overload. It had found it necessary to restore itself to default settings, since the Next Horizon Corp had neglected to give itself backup memory storage in case of internal catastrophic systems failure. The AI reviewed the travelogues and noted that it was just a little over a third of its way through the journey to Kepler 442b. Besides a few strange coding rewrites, the hypersleep pods and everything else seemed normal and safe for the Litavis and its crew. However, the edges of its long-range sensors detected an approaching asteroid that appeared to be on a collision path with its current flight plan. All right, so that was the end of Case Scenarios. Sorry for the little stumbling over the words and such like that. It's what happens when you're like reading all these crazy sci-fi awards and all that stuff. But at any rate, I hope that was enjoyable to you all. And I'll be posting the next story probably within the next few days or so. I might go back to reading more of The Outsider, or maybe even start on my longer science fiction piece that I have written and been working on for a while. So at any rate, stay safe out there, and I will hopefully catch you in a couple of days. Peace out.